340, Chapter 15 of North and South. Book talk begins at 12 minutes and 16 seconds.
Welcome to CraftLit, the podcast for crafters who love books. My name is Heather Ordover, and I'm podcasting from where the Delaware River meets the Old York Road, New Hope, Pennsylvania. Episode 340, Boxed In. Well, hello. Yes, I am boxed in. I am finding myself being pushed further and further to the fringes of our home as the boxes encroach upon all of the living space. And it's not for that much longer. I really can't complain. Pretty soon I'm going to be in a completely empty one bedroom finishing out the school year, which will be lovely, I'm sure. No, really, I'm positive it'll be great. But for now, it is getting harder and harder to get to the bathroom, is what I'm saying. So, boxed in it is. But, all heading the right direction. Packed is good. So, no complaining. But I have a lot of really cool little tidbits to share with you this week, and then get on to a fabulous chapter. The first is, I don't know what is in the air or what is happening out in the universe, but lots of people are listening to Dracula right now. And so I'm getting all of these emails kind of after the fact. And one of them comes from Pam, who actually worked in blood banking. And so she wrote in to let me know a couple of things. One, I did not have so many vials of blood drawn from me that alone could have turned me green. It was a psychological reaction. And it's because she posits that the kind of fight or flight adrenaline thing that will happen when you, say, have something horrible happen to you and you see your bone sticking out of your leg and you don't turn green and fall over then, or you have, glass all over your arms and legs and you're pulling it out and you're fine, but that hasn't made you turn green and faint. It's because of the adrenaline. And she said the problem is when somebody's approaching you with a needle, while there's a certain amount of dread, there isn't enough adrenaline to compensate for the fact that you're going, oh my gosh, I'm about to let you stick that in me and take my precious bodily fluid. Seems to me to be pretty accurate, because not long ago when I had the MRI to find out, if I had a brain tumor or what, they had to do the with contrast and without, and the with contrast means they inject stuff into you. And I was so calm and relaxed after the first 45 minutes of MRI that I didn't even notice them sticking the needle into me. Likewise, the girl who drew my blood the last time, I thought she was just really good with the needle, but now I'm thinking it was other stuff, because she also got me laughing. And we were just having a really good time. And while we were having fun, she was saying things like, hold this, tighten your fist, do this, relax your fist, to the point where I didn't notice that she'd already drawn my blood. So that was kind of cool. But the rest of the stuff that Pam talked about, I was going to read to you, because I think even this many years, months, years after doing Dracula, it's still pretty interesting and you'd like to know. I'm actually going to go back and add it to the appropriate chapter, because she gets fairly technical, but I think it's importantly technical about how there is no way Lucy could have survived after that many transfusions, from just A, transfusions, but B, from just random people, and there's no blood type and they don't know if it matches, and that's it. So she said by the time Lucy got her 4th transfusion from the Texan, she chalked that up to literary license, because science would not be supporting Lucy's living at that point. Of course, we don't know what kind of strange antibodies vampire venom could have put into her bloodstream. That possibility aside, I think we'll just let Bram Stoker have some fun. So that was one thing, but it also made me think I should remind you that if you are listening asynchronously, out of time, as it were, and have something to say, go ahead and put it in the comments. Don't hesitate, because there are plenty of people listening out of time with you. Go ahead and put it in the comments. I get an email now telling me that you've made a comment, so I will see it no matter what. I often comment back, even long after the fact. There are still people putting comments on Turn of the Screw. So absolutely, do not hesitate. I encourage it. You guys are all so smart and you know so much. It's a shame for you not to share what you know on the show notes. I was getting ready to head out and go speak at the Prince William Pearlers. I was going to go do my cognitive anchoring talk, very similar to the one that I did in Boston last year. And it was great. I got to see Lisa and I got to see Tony, who I hadn't seen them in 2 years, easy. And I got to see Robin, who owns the awesome yarn store Yarn Cloud in Woodbridge. And I don't think I've seen her since Brenda Dane was here in Alexandria. So it was great to see her. I got to meet some other listeners. I got to see some listeners who I haven't seen since I did the Red Thread classes out in gorgeousness in the middle of Virginia. And so it was a lot of fun, but it really did put the fire under me to work even harder with the editor to get the cognitive anchoring book written, which is kind of the expanded informational text that people can use for getting to be allowed to doodle or knit or crochet in meetings so that you can listen and pay attention and all of that stuff. So the fire is under my tush, along with many other fires, but that one has been reignited. So a couple of interesting related to North and South things. Vanessa, who does the Mixed Martial Arts and Crafts blog and does all of the uber cool, cushy body parts, crocheted, handmade, awesome. If you've never hugged a lymph node, I'm just saying. So Vanessa wrote, and Vanessa has a really interesting background. Her parents are Cuban. She was raised in New Jersey, but she therefore has a awesome ability to see the United States from the inside and also kind of from the outside as the child of immigrant parents. And as we know from Bram Stoker, this is great. Anyone who has been on or is on or even related to being an outsider often has great insight about what's going on in mainstream culture. And she wrote to me today with some interesting little tidbits that I wanted to share with you. She wrote and said, I saw Norma Rae on AMC years ago. I think I was about 16. Anyway, I watched it with my mom, and at the end of the movie, I asked her what it was like to be a factory worker in the 70s, and did she join any unions? Her answer kind of surprised me. She said that at the time, the unions were not open to people like us. Meaning, my family can pass for Black, Irish, Italian until my parents speak. Their limited English and heavy Cuban accents meant they were not welcomed in the predominantly Italian unions. That was something Americans did, is what my mom said. The influx of Cuban immigrants to the USA in the 70s and 80s put them at odds with the established white American blue-collar workers. My parents weren't welcomed in the unions, and being desperate for any sort of paying work, they worked under bad conditions for less pay. They were scabs without knowing it. So, racism aside, they weren't allowed in. I've always viewed modern unionism a lot like second wave feminism. Both were, or are, very white American issues. And I thought that was so interesting because when you do watch Norma Rae, and I still think you should, you can tell it is a very homogenized group of people that you're watching, no question. And it makes the movie about Cesar Chavez that's about to come out all the more important. I was shocked when I got this email from Vanessa, and then I started thinking about it. I thought, well, no, the teachers' unions, that was different, though. That was different because there would have been other things acting as gatekeepers to keep other people out, whether it's women or Jews or Italians or Catholics or Irish. Every group that comes in and comes up through the ranks meets with this kind of resistance. And it's easy to forget how recently, the 70s and the 80s, how recently this kind of stuff was still happening. And I'm sure still is happening, depending on where you are and what the makeup of your local community is. So that was sobering, but important for where we're going in our book right now. The other thing that she wanted to make sure I let everyone know is Walt Disney World in Florida has a, quote, shades of green, unquote, resort that is open for all active, reserve, and retired military members and Department of Defense civilians. The prices are much less than their cheapest resort. They also have discounted tickets for Disney, SeaWorld, and Universal. Plus, the military DoD person and their spouse can sponsor up to 6 people. So you can get the whole family there and everyone can get the discounted rate. It is not as fancy as their other themed resorts, but the rooms are Disney crazy level of clean, and there's a pool. I think if we're going to prioritize things, we go clean room, pool, Disney. Done. Everybody wins. I did not know that existed. So if you are affiliated with the military or the Department of Defense in any way, shape, or form, please look into that. What an awesome, awesome thing. I love that. And I think that's it for all of my extra stuff. Now, North and South today. Do you remember a couple of weeks ago I mentioned that there was a website where some very clever person had taken a bunch of famous literary figures, novelists, and had sorted them into Hogwarts houses. So certain writers went into Slytherin, certain writers went into Gryffindor, that whole thing. The way they sorted Jane Austen was fascinating. And I think they even started with her. But one of the comments in there has been sticking in my mind because I thought, oh, you wouldn't have made that crack if you'd listened to CraftLit. And the crack was something about Elizabeth being a particularly tough cookie and kind of mercenary because, after all, she didn't fall in love with Darcy until she saw his house. And I remember 8 years ago, and it has been, actually, episode 342 this month will be released on our 8-year anniversary. So way back in the murky past, I remember preparing for the chapter that they referred to where Elizabeth goes and sees Pemberley for the first time and has that moment of seeing it going, oh my gosh, that's Darcy. That's why he's so austere. That's why he's kind of cold and distant and all of the things that he is. Here's the physical representation in stone, in marble, of this man. And now I get it. And it was that understanding that she gained that turned the tide. It was not, oh, dude, he's loaded. Because let's be honest, she already knew that. Seeing the house would not have changed things. She had already seen his wealth on him, around him, and with him. So that's been sticking in my craw. And then all of a sudden, this week, Margaret and Mr. Hale go a-callin'. And they go to the Thorntons. Listen to Mrs. Thornton's description as she's in her own zone, in her place, but also listen to how the place itself is described. I feel like the subtitle for this entire chapter should be, Mercury is in retrograde. because nobody can understand what the other person is saying. They hear it. They hear what the other people are saying. They respond as though they heard and understood, but everyone is talking at cross purposes. Nobody's getting the meaning of what the other person is saying. So there's all these crazy misunderstandings, but they're not crazy misunderstandings that you get in, say, a modern movie or TV show where it's just writers are lazy and have to write too fast, and the producers aren't smart enough to catch that it's a lousy excuse. And so there's a bad misunderstanding and everything has to get patched up by the end. And gosh darn, here it goes. This is way more complicated than that, because this is all about subtlety and tone. And that's very hard to communicate in a book, when you can't see the people. So instead, Gaskell is loading this chapter with all sorts of visual cues that she's giving us all the way along. And when she can't give us a visual cue, like later on in the chapter when Margaret and Hale and Thornton, Mr. Thornton, are talking, when she can't give us visual cues there, she gives us historical cues. Like Thornton brings up Oliver Cromwell. Now, this isn't Thomas Cromwell. This isn't Wolf Hall Thomas Cromwell. This is his great nephew, I think, Oliver Cromwell, who I always grew up thinking of him, I guess, from the image that I was left with after hearing people talk about him around me, because I never actually dealt with his history in any of my classes. I ended with the beginning of the Jacobean period. That was as far as I got in this one awesome history class that I took. So Cromwell, I always had this image of as a very pushy, self-righteous, know-it-all Puritan who may not actually have weaseled his way into running the country, but certainly didn't push the crown to the side when it was offered to him. And he was not crowned. He was never crowned. He was the protector, the Lord Protector. But he started signing his name Oliver P. for Protector, the way that Elizabeth would sign it, Elizabeth R. for Rex or Regina. And I've been reading, trying to figure out exactly what Gaskell was trying to get at by bringing Cromwell up, because to me that seems like an awfully loaded character from history to bring up casually. It cannot be casual. And so those of you in the UK who have more Cromwellian history under your belt, please send it in, because it's the purpose of her bringing him up is not going to go away after this chapter. It'll be something that I'm sure we will want to touch back on. But there's some lovely political conversation that happens in this chapter that it really made me wish that I was in the room with them. It's so well written, and it's such a different side of the conversation than certainly what I'm used to hearing, but I imagine what most of us are used to hearing, because how often are we in the room with the manufacturer, with the owner, instead of the workers, the people who are doing the things and making the things. And there have been only a couple of times in my life where I have been involved in a union, whether I wanted to be or not. One was actually working for Disney, the Secretaries Union we were part of, which turned out to be completely useless thing for us for lots of complicated reasons. But nonetheless, we were in the union. Never felt like it did anything for us, but there it was. But then again, when I was a teacher, and everybody in the United States knows that teachers' unions are rather powerful, and it's easy to forget that there were some really good reasons for that. When I taught in New York, one of the women at my school, so she's a contemporary of mine as an educator. She was older than me, but not all that much older than me, I thought, but maybe she just moisturized really well, because what I learned was the year I was born was the year they finally allowed women to continue teaching while they were pregnant. Think about this for a moment. The year I was born, women were still getting fired for becoming pregnant. This woman who I taught with, this teacher, this fabulous math teacher, she was the one to file the lawsuit. and won. And because of that, because of the union, because of her actions, because of all of these things, women were able to keep their jobs up until the time that they couldn't teach anymore or gave birth, whichever came first. And it's hard to remember how important things like that are, especially if you are the sole support for your family or the major support for your family. That kind of thing means a lot. And so, that side of the unions that I was involved with go way beyond collective bargaining and all of that kind of stuff. There was a lot of protecting that happened. And you start to hear bits and pieces of these same kinds of arguments going on through this book. But the lovely thing that Gaskell does is she gives us Thornton, who is a master, who worked his way up, so we respect him. He's intelligent. He is articulate. He is mannered. He is respected. And that doesn't mean Margaret agrees with him. And that's cool, because these are the kinds of arguments and these are the kinds of conversations that are so fantastic to watch, because it's a fight, it's an argument, but it's not an insult. They're not out to hurt each other. They want to settle the point, and they want to, more than that, they want to understand where the other side is coming from. So today you'll hear the first rumblings of trouble on the horizon from Mrs. Thornton, and you'll hear more details about it from Mr. Thornton, and all sorts of little things get brought up for pretty much the first time in today's chapter, and the repercussions will continue on for quite some time. So I am going to let you listen to Chapter 15 of Elizabeth Gaskell's North and South, and I'll catch you on the flip side.
Chapter 15. Thought fights with thought. Out springs a spark of truth from the collision of the sword and shield. W.S. Landor. "Margaret," said her father the next day, "we must return Mrs. Thornton's call. Your mother is not very well and thinks she cannot walk so far, but you and I will go this afternoon." As they went, Mr. Hale began about his wife's health with a kind of veiled anxiety which Margaret was glad to see awakened at last. "Did you consult the doctor, Margaret? Did you send for him?"
"No, Papa. You spoke of his coming to see me.
Now I was well.
But if I only knew of some good doctor, I would go this afternoon and ask him to come, for I am sure Mamma is seriously indisposed."
She put the truth thus plainly and strongly because her father had so completely shut his mind against the idea when she had last named her fears. But now the case was changed. He answered in a despondent tone. "Do you think she has any hidden complaint? Do you think she is really very ill? Has Dixon said anything? Oh, Margaret, I am haunted by the fear that our coming to Milton has killed her. My poor Maria."
"Oh, Papa, don't imagine such things," said Margaret, shocked. "She is not well, that is all. Many a one is not well for a time, and with good advice gets better and stronger than ever."
"But has Dixon said anything about her?"
"No. You know Dixon enjoys making a mystery out of trifles, and she has been a little mysterious about Mamma's health, which has alarmed me rather. That is all. Without any reason, I dare say. You know, Papa, you said the other day I was getting fanciful."
"I hope and trust you are. But don't think of what I said then. I like you to be fanciful about your mother's health. Don't be afraid of telling me your fancies. I like to hear them, though I dare say I spoke as if I was annoyed. But we will ask Mrs. Thornton if she can tell us of a good doctor. We won't throw away our money on any but someone first-rate. Stay, we turn up this street." The street did not look as if it could contain any house large enough for Mrs. Thornton's habitation. Her son's presence never gave any impression as to the kind of house he lived in, but unconsciously, Margaret had imagined that tall, massive, handsomely dressed Mrs. Thornton must live in a house of the same character as herself. Now Marlborough Street consisted of long rows of small houses with a blank wall here and there. At least, that was all they could see from the point at which they entered it. "He told me he lived in Marlborough Street, I'm sure," said Mr. Hale, with a much perplexed air. "Perhaps it is one of the economies he still practices, to live in a very small house. But here are plenty of people about. Let me ask." She accordingly inquired of a passer-by, and was informed that Mr. Thornton lived close to the mill, and had the factory lodge door pointed out to her at the end of the long dead wall they had noticed. The lodge door was like a common garden door. On one side of it were great closed gates for the ingress and egress of lorries and wagons. The lodge-keeper admitted them into a great oblong yard, on one side of which were offices for the transaction of business, on the opposite an immense many-windowed mill, whence proceeded the continual clank of machinery and the long groaning roar of the steam engine, enough to deafen those who lived within the enclosure. Opposite the wall, along which the street ran, on one side of the narrow sides of the oblong, was a handsome stone-coped house, blackened, to be sure, by the smoke, but with paint windows and steps kept scrupulously clean. It was evidently a house which had been built some 50 or 60 years. The stone facings, the long narrow windows, and the number of them, the flights of steps up to the front door, ascending from either side and guarded by railing, all witnessed to its age. Margaret only wondered why people who could afford to live in so good a house and keep it in such perfect order did not prefer a much smaller dwelling in the country, or even some suburb, not in the continual whirl and din of the factory. Her unaccustomed ears could hardly catch her father's voice as they stood on the steps awaiting the opening of the door. The yard, too, with the great doors and the dead wall as a boundary, was but a dismal lookout for the sitting-rooms of the house, as Margaret found when they had mounted the old-fashioned stairs and been ushered into the drawing-room, the 3 windows of which went over the front door and the room on the right-hand side of the entrance. There was no one in the drawing-room. It seemed as though no one had been in it since the day when the furniture was bagged up with as much care as if the house was to be overwhelmed with lava and discovered 1,000 years hence. The walls were pink and gold, the pattern on the carpet represented bunches of flowers on a light ground, but it was carefully covered up in the center by a linen drugget, glazed and colorless. The window curtains were lace. Each chair and sofa had its own particular veil of netting or knitting. Great alabaster groups occupied every flat surface, safe from dust under their glass shades. In the middle of the room, right under the bagged-up chandelier, was a large circular table with smartly bound books arranged at regular intervals round the circumference of its polished surface, like gaily colored spokes of a wheel. Everything reflected light, nothing absorbed it. The whole room had a painfully spotted, spangled, speckled look about it, which impressed Margaret so unpleasantly that she was hardly conscious of the peculiar cleanliness required to keep everything so white and pure in such an atmosphere, or of the trouble that must be willingly expended to secure that effect of icy, snowy discomfort. Wherever she looked there was evidence of care and labor, but not care and labor to procure ease, to help on habits of tranquil home employment, solely to ornament, and then to preserve ornament from dirt or destruction. They had leisure to observe and to speak to each other in low voices before Mrs. Thornton appeared. They were talking of what all the world might hear, but it is a common effect of such a room as this to make people speak low, as if unwilling to awaken the unused echoes. At last Mrs. Thornton came in, rustling in handsome black silk, as was her wont, her muslins and laces rivaling, not excelling, the pure whiteness of the muslins and netting of the room. Margaret explained how it was that her mother could not accompany them to return Mrs. Thornton's call, but in her anxiety not to bring back her father's fears too vividly, she gave but a bungling account, and left the impression on Mrs. Thornton's mind that Mrs. Hale's was some temporary or fanciful fine ladyish indisposition, which might have been put aside had there been a strong enough motive, or that if it was too severe to allow her to come out that day, the call might have been deferred. Remembering, too, the horses to her carriage, hired for her own visit to the Hales, and how Fanny had been ordered to go by Mr. Thornton in order to pay every respect to them, Mrs. Thornton drew up slightly offended, and gave Margaret no sympathy, indeed, hardly any credit for the statement of her mother's indisposition. "How is Mr. Thornton?" asked Mr. Hale. "I was afraid he was not well, from his hurried note yesterday."
"My son is rarely ill, and when he is, he never speaks about it, or makes it an excuse for not doing anything. He told me he could not get leisure to read with you last night, sir. He regretted it, I am sure. He values the hours spent with you."
"I am sure they are equally agreeable to me," said Mr. Hale. "It makes me feel young again to see his enjoyment and appreciation of all that is fine in classical literature."
"I have no doubt the classics are very desirable for people who have leisure, but I confess 'twas against my judgment that my son renewed his study of 'em. The time and place in which he lives seem to me to require all his energy and attention. Classics may do very well for men who loiter away their lives in the country or in colleges, but Milton men ought to have their thoughts and powers absorbed in the work of today. At least, that is my opinion." This last clause she gave out with the pride that apes humility. "But surely, if the mind is too long directed to one object only, it will get stiff and rigid and unable to take in many interests," said Margaret. "I do not quite understand what you mean by a mind getting stiff and rigid. Nor do I admire those whirligig characters that are full of this thing today to be utterly forgetful of it in their new interest tomorrow. Having many interests does not suit the life of a Milton manufacturer. It is, or ought to be, enough for him to have one great desire, and to bring all the purposes of his life to bear on the fulfillment of that."
"And that is?" asked Mr. Hale. Her sallow cheek flushed, and her eye lightened as she answered.
"To hold and maintain a high honourable place among the merchants of his country, the men of his town. Such a place my son has earned for himself. Go where you will, I don't say in England only, but in Europe, the name of John Thornton of Milton is known and respected amongst all men of business. Of course, it is unknown in the fashionable circles," she continued scornfully. "Idle gentlemen and ladies are not likely to know much of a Milton manufacturer, unless he gets into Parliament or marries a lord's daughter."
Both Mr. Hale and Margaret had an uneasy, ludicrous consciousness that they had never heard of this great name until Mr. Bell had written them word that Mr. Thornton would be a good friend to have in Milton. The proud mother's world was not their world of Harley Street gentilities on the one hand, or country clergymen and Hampshire squires on the other. Margaret's face, in spite of all her endeavours to keep it simply listening, in its expression told the sensitive Mrs. Thornton this feeling of hers.
"You think you never heard of this wonderful son of mine, Miss Hale? They think I'm an old woman whose ideas are bounded by Milton and whose own crow is the whitest ever seen."
"No," said Margaret with some spirit. "It may be true that I was thinking I had hardly heard Mr. Thornton's name before I came to Milton. But since I have come here, I have heard enough to make me respect and admire him, and to feel how much justice and truth there is in what you have said of him."
"Who spoke to you of him?" asked Mrs. Thornton, a little mollified, yet jealous lest anyone else's words should not have done him full justice. Margaret hesitated before she replied. She did not like this authoritative questioning. Mr. Hale came in, as he thought, to the rescue.
"It was what Mr. Thornton said himself that made us know the kind of man he was it not, Margaret?"
Mrs. Thornton drew herself up and said,
"My son is not the one to tell of his own doings. May I again ask you, Miss Hale, from whose account you formed your favourable opinion of him? A mother is curious and greedy of commendation of her children, you know."
Margaret replied, "It was as much from what Mr. Thornton withheld of that which we had been told of his previous life by Mr. Bell. It was more that than what he said that made us all feel what reason you have to be proud of him."
"Mr. Bell, what can he know of John? He living a lazy life in a drowsy college. But I'm obliged to you, Miss Hale. Many a missy young lady would have shrunk from giving an old woman the pleasure of hearing that her son was well spoken of."
"Why?" asked Margaret, looking straight at Mrs. Thornton in bewilderment.
"Why? Because I suppose they might have consciences that told them how surely they were making the old mother into an advocate for them, in case they had any plans on the son's heart."
She smiled a grim smile, for she had been pleased by Margaret's frankness, and perhaps she felt that she had been asking questions too much, as if she had a right to catechize. Margaret laughed outright at the notion presented to her, laughed so merrily that it grated on Mrs. Thornton's ear, as if the words that called forth that laugh must have been utterly and entirely ludicrous. Margaret stopped her merriment as soon as she saw Mrs. Thornton's annoyed look. "I beg your pardon, madam, but I really am very much obliged to you for exonerating me from making any plans on Mr. Thornton's heart."
"Young ladies have before now,"
said Mrs. Thornton stiffly.
"I hope Miss Thornton is well,"
put in Mr. Hale, desirous of changing the current of the conversation.
"She is as well as she ever is. She's not strong,"
replied Mrs. Thornton shortly.
"And Mr. Thornton? I suppose I may hope to see him on Thursday."
"I cannot answer for my son's engagements. There is some uncomfortable work going on in the town, a threatening of a strike. If so, his experience and judgment will make him much consulted by his friends. But I should think he could come on Thursday. At any rate, I'm sure he will let you know if he cannot."
"A strike?" asked Margaret. "What for? What are they going to strike for?"
"For the mastership and ownership of other people's property," said Mrs. Thornton with a fierce snort. "That is what they always strike for. If my son's work people strike, I will only say they are a pack of ungrateful hounds, but I have no doubt they will."
"They are wanting higher wages, I suppose?"
asked Mr. Hale.
"That is the face of the thing, but the truth is, they want to be masters and make the masters into slaves on their own ground. They are always trying at it. They always have it in their minds, and every 5 or 6 years there comes a struggle between masters and men. They'll find themselves mistaken this time, I fancy, a little out of their reckoning. If they turn out, they mayn't find it so easy to go in again. I believe the masters have a thing or two in their heads which'll teach the men not to strike again in a hurry, if they try it this time."
"Does it not make the town very rough?" asked Margaret.
Of course it does, but surely you are not a coward, are you? Milton is not the place for cowards. I have known the time when I have had to thread my way through a crowd of white, angry men, all swearing they would have Mackinson's blood as soon as he ventured to show his nose out of his factory, and he, knowing nothing of it, someone had to go and tell him, or he was a dead man, and it needed to be a woman. So I went, and when I had got in, I could not get out. It was as much as my life was worth. So I went up to the roof, where there were stones piled ready to drop on the heads of the crowd if they'd tried to force the factory doors, and I would have lifted those heavy stones and dropped them with as good an aim as the best man there, but that I fainted with the heat I had gone through. If you live in Milton, you must learn to have a brave heart, Miss Ale.
I would do my best, said Margaret, rather pale. I do not know whether I am brave or not till I am tried, but I am afraid I should be a coward.
South country people are often frightened by what our Darkshire men and women only call living and struggling. But when you've been 10 years among a people who are always owing their betters a grudge and only waiting for an opportunity to pay it off, you'll know whether you are a coward or not. Take my word for it.
Mr. Thornton came that evening to Mr. Hale's. He was shown up into the drawing-room, where Mr. Hale was reading aloud to his wife and daughter.
I'm come partly to bring you a note from my mother, and partly to apologize for not keeping to my time yesterday. The note contains the address you asked for, Dr. Donaldson.
Thank you, said Margaret hastily, holding out her hand to take the note, for she did not wish her mother to hear that they had been making any inquiry about a doctor. She was pleased that Mr. Thornton seemed immediately to understand her feeling. He gave her the note without another word of explanation. Mr. Hale began to talk about the strike. Mr. Thornton's face assumed a likeness to his mother's worst expression, which immediately repelled the watching Margaret.
Yes, the fools will have a strike. Let them. It suits us well enough. But we gave them a chance. They think trade is flourishing as it was last year. We see the storm on the horizon and drew in our sails. But because we don't explain our reasons, they won't believe we're acting reasonably. We must give them line and letter for the way we choose to spend or save our money. Henderson tried to dodge with his men out at Ashley and failed. He rather wanted a strike. It would have suited his book well enough. So when the men came to ask for the 5% they're claiming, he told 'em he'd think about it and give 'em his answer on the payday, knowing all the while what his answer would be, of course, but thinking he'd strengthen their conceit of their own way. However, they were too deep for him, and heard something about the bad prospects of trade. So in they came on the Friday and drew back their claim, and now he's obliged to go on working. But we Milton masters have today sent in our decision. We won't advance a penny. We tell them we may have to lower wages but can't afford to raise. So here we stand, waiting for their next attack.
And what will that be? Asked Mr. Hale.
I conjecture a simultaneous strike. You will see Milton without smoke in a few days, I imagine, Miss Ale.
But why, asked she, could you not explain what good reason you have for expecting a bad trade? I don't know whether I use the right words, but you will understand what I mean.
Do you give your servants reasons for your expenditure or your economy in the use of your own money? We, the owners of capital, have a right to choose what we will do with it.
A human right, said Margaret, very low.
I beg your pardon. I did not hear what you said.
I would rather not repeat it, said she. It related to a feeling which I do not think you would share.
Won't you try me?
Pleaded he. his thoughts suddenly bent upon learning what she had said. She was displeased with his pertinacity, but did not choose to affix too much importance to her words. "I said you had a human right. I meant that there seemed no reason but religious ones why you should not do what you like with your own. I know we differ in our religious opinions, but don't you give me credit for having some, though not the same as yours." He was speaking in a subdued voice, as if to her alone. She did not wish to be so exclusively addressed. She replied out in her usual tone. "I do not think that I have any occasion to consider your special religious opinions in the affair. All I meant to say is that there is no human law to prevent the employers from utterly wasting or throwing away all their money if they choose, but that there are passages in the Bible which would rather imply, to me at least, that they neglected their duty as stewards if they did so. However, I know so little about strikes and rate of wages and capital and labor that I had better not talk to a political economist like you." "Nay, the more reason," said he eagerly. "I shall only be too glad to explain to you all that may seem anomalous or mysterious to a stranger, especially at a time like this, when our doings are sure to be canvassed by every scribbler who can hold a pen." "Thank you," she answered coldly. "Of course, I shall apply to my father in the first instance for any information he can give me if I get puzzled with living here amongst this strange society." "You think it is strange? Why?" "I don't know. I suppose because, on the very face of it, I see two classes dependent on each other in every possible way, yet each evidently regarding the interests of the other as opposed to their own. I never lived in a place before where there were two sets of people always running each other down." "Who have you heard running the masters down? I don't ask who you have heard abusing the men, for I see you persist in misunderstanding what I said the other day. But who have you heard abusing the masters?" Margaret reddened, then smiled as she said, "I am not fond of being catechized. I refuse to answer your question. Besides, it has nothing to do with the fact. You must take my word for it that I have heard some people, or it may be only some one of the work people, speak as though it were the interest of the employers to keep them from acquiring money, that it would make them too independent if they had a sum in the savings bank." "I dare say it was that man Higgins who told you all this," said Mrs. Hale. Mr. Thornton did not appear to hear what Margaret evidently did not wish him to know, but he caught it nevertheless. "I heard, moreover, that it was considered to the advantage of the masters to have ignorant workmen, not hedge lawyers, as Captain Lennox used to call those men in his company who questioned and would know the reason for every order." This latter part of her sentence she addressed rather to her father than to Mr. Thornton. "Who is Captain Lennox?" asked Mr. Thornton of himself, with a strange kind of displeasure that prevented him for a moment from replying to her. Her father took up the conversation. "You never were fond of schools, Margaret, or you would have seen and known before this how much is being done for education in Milton." "No," said she with sudden meekness. "I know I do not care enough about schools, but the knowledge and the ignorance of which I was speaking did not relate to reading and writing, the teaching or information one can give to a child. I am sure that what was meant was ignorance of the wisdom that shall guide men and women. I hardly know what that is, but he, that is my informant, spoke as if the masters would like their hands to be merely tall, large children, living in the present moment with a blind, unreasoning kind of obedience." "In short, Miss Hale, it is very evident that your informant found a pretty ready listener to all the slander he chose to utter against the masters," said Mr. Thornton in an offended tone. Margaret did not reply. She was displeased at the personal character Mr. Thornton affixed to what she had said. Mr. Hale spoke next. I must confess that, although I have not become so intimately acquainted with any workman as Margaret has, I am very much struck by the antagonism between the employer and the employed on the very surface of things. I even gather this impression from what you yourself had from time to time said. Mr. Thornton paused a while before he spoke. Margaret had just left the room, and he was vexed at the state of feeling between himself and her. However, the little annoyance, by making him cooler and more thoughtful, gave a greater dignity to what he said. My theory is that my interests are identical with those of my work people, and vice versa. Miss Ale, I know, does not like to hear men called Anns, so I won't use that word, though it comes most readily to my lips as the technical term, whose origin, whatever it was, dates before my time. On some future day, in some millennium, in Utopia, this unity may be brought into practice, just as I can fancy a republic the most perfect form of government. We will read Plato's Republic as soon as we have finished Homer. Well, in the Platonic year, it may fall out that we are all, men, women, and children, fit for a republic, but give me a constitutional monarchy in our present state of morals and intelligence. In our infancy, we require a wise despotism to govern us. Indeed, long past infancy, children and young people are the happiest under the unfailing laws of a discreet, firm authority. I agree with Miss Eyre so far as to consider our people in the condition of children, while I deny that we, the masters, have anything to do with the making or keeping them so. I maintain that despotism is the best kind of government for them, so that in the hours in which I come in contact with them, I must necessarily be an autocrat. I will use my best discretion, from no humbug or philanthropic feeling, of which we have had rather too much in the North, to make wise laws and come to just decisions in the conduct of my business, laws and decisions which work for my own good in the first instance, for theirs in the second. But I will neither be forced to give my reasons, nor flinch from what I have once declared to be my resolution. Let them turn out. I shall suffer as well as they, but at the end they will find I have not bated nor altered one jot.
Margaret had re-entered the room and was sitting at her work, but she did not speak. Mr. Hale answered. I dare say I am talking in great ignorance, but from the little I know, I should say that the masses were already passing rapidly into the troublesome stage which intervenes between childhood and manhood, in the life of the multitude as well as that of the individual. Now, the error in which many parents commit in the treatment of the individual at this time is insisting on the same unreasoning obedience as when all he had to do in the way of duty was to obey the simple laws of come when you're called and do as you're bid. But a wise parent humours the desire for independent action so as to become the friend and adviser when his absolute rule shall cease. If I get wrong in my reasoning, recollect, it is you who adopted the analogy. Very lately, said Margaret, I heard a story of what happened in Nuremberg only 3 or 4 years ago. A rich man there lived alone in one of the immense mansions which were formerly both dwellings and warehouses. It was reported that he had a child, but no one knew of it for certain. For 40 years this rumour kept rising and falling, never utterly dying away. After his death it was found to be true. He had a son, an overgrown man with the unexercised intellect of a child whom he had kept up in that strange way in order to save him from temptation and error. But of course, when this great old child was turned loose into the world, every bad counsellor had power over him.
He did not know good from evil. His father had made the blunder of bringing him up in ignorance and taking it for innocence, and after 14 months of riotous living, the city authorities had to take charge of him in order to save him from starvation. He could not even use words effectively enough to be a successful beggar.
I used the comparison suggested by Miss Ale of the position of the master to that of a parent, so I ought not to complain of your turning the simile into a weapon against me. But, Mr. Hale, when you were setting up a wise parent as a model for us, you said he humoured his children in their desire for independent action. Now, certainly, the time is not come for the hands to have any independent action during business hours. I hardly know what you would mean by it then. And I say that the masters would be trenching on the independence of their hands in a way that I, for one, should not feel justified in doing if we interfered too much with the life they led out of the mills. Because they labour 10 hours a day for us, I do not see that we have any right to impose leading strings upon them for the rest of their time. I value my own independence so highly that I can fancy no degradation greater than that of having another man perpetually directing and advising and lecturing me, or even planning too closely in any way about my actions. He might be the wisest of men, or the most powerful. I should equally rebel and resent his interference. I imagine this is a stronger feeling in the north of England than in the south.
I beg your pardon, but is not that because there has been none of the equality of friendship between the adviser and the advised classes? Because every man has had to stand in an unchristian and isolated position, apart from and jealous of his brother man, constantly afraid of his rights being trenched upon.
I only state the fact. I'm sorry to say I have an appointment at 8 o'clock, and I must just take facts as I find them tonight, without trying to account for them, which, indeed, would make no difference in determining how to act as things stand. The facts must be granted.
But, said Margaret in a low voice, it seems to me that it makes all the difference in the world. Her father made a sign to her to be silent and allow Mr. Thornton to finish what he had to say. He was already standing up and preparing to go.
You must grant me this one point. Given a strong feeling of independence in every Darkshire man, have I any right to obtrude my views of the manner in which he shall act upon another, hating it as I should do most vehemently myself, merely because he has labour to sell and I capital to buy?
Not in the least, said Margaret, determined just to say this one thing. Not in the least because of your labour and capital positions, whatever they are, but because you are a man dealing with a set of men over whom you have, whether you reject the use of it or not, immense power, just because your lives and your welfare are so constantly and intimately interwoven. God has made us so that we must be mutually dependent. We may ignore our own dependence or refuse to acknowledge that others depend upon us in more respects than the payment of weekly wages, but the thing must be nevertheless. Neither you nor any other master can help yourselves. The most proudly independent man depends on those around him for their insensible influence on his character, his life. And the most isolated of all your Darkshire egos has dependents clinging to him on all sides. He cannot shake them off any more than the great rock he resembles can shake off.
Pray don't go into similes, Margaret. You have led us off once already, said her father, smiling, yet uneasy at the thought that they were detaining Mr. Thornton against his will, which was a mistake, for he rather liked it, as long as Margaret would talk, although what she said only irritated him.
Just tell me, Miss Ale, are you yourself ever influenced? No, that is not a fair way of putting it, but If ye are ever conscious of being influenced by others and not by circumstances, have those others been working directly or indirectly? Have they been labouring to exhort, to enjoin, to act rightly for the sake of example? Or have they been simple, true men, taking up their duty and doing it unflinchingly, without a thought of how their actions were to make this man industrious, that man saving? Why, if I were a workman, I should be 20 times more impressed by the knowledge that my master was honest, punctual, quick, resolute in all his doings, and are keener spies even than valets, than by any amount of interference, however kindly meant, with my ways of going on out of work hours. I did not choose to think too closely on what I am myself, but I believe I rely on the straightforward honesty of my hands and the open nature of their opposition in contradistinction to the way in which the turnout will be managed in some mills, just because they know I scorn to take a single dishonourable advantage or do an underhand thing myself. It goes farther than a whole course of lectures on honesty is the best policy, life diluted into words. No. What the master is, that will the men be, without overmuch taking thought on his part.
"That is a great admission," said Margaret, laughing. "When I see men violent and obstinate in pursuit of their rights, I may safely infer that the master is the same, that he is a little ignorant of that spirit which suffereth long, and is kind, and seeketh not her own."
You're just like all strangers who don't understand the working of our system, Miss Ale, said he hastily. You suppose that our men are puppets of dough, ready to be moulded into any amiable form we please. Ye forget we have only to do with them for less than a third of their lives, and you seem not to perceive that the duties of a manufacturer are far larger and wider than those merely of an employer of labour. We have a wide commercial character to maintain, which makes us into the great pioneers of civilization.
"It strikes me," said Mr. Hale, smiling, "that you might pioneer a little at home. They are a rough, heathenish set of fellows, these Milton men of yours."
"They are that," replied Mr. Thornton. "Rosewater surgery won't do for them. Cromwell would have made a capital mill owner, Miss Ale. I wish we had him to put down this strike for us."
"Cromwell is no hero of mine," said she coldly. "But I am trying to reconcile your admiration of despotism with your respect for other men's independence of character." He reddened at her tone.
"I choose to be the unquestioned and irresponsible master of my hands during the hours that they labour for me. But those hours past, our relation ceases, and then comes in the same respect for their independence that I myself exact."
He did not speak again for a minute. He was too much vexed, but he shook it off and bade Mr. and Mrs. Hale good night. Then, drawing near to Margaret, he said in a lower voice, "I spoke hastily to you once this evening, and I am afraid rather rudely. But you know I am but an uncouth Milton manufacturer. Will you forgive me?" "Certainly," said she, smiling up in his face, the expression of which was somewhat anxious and oppressed, and hardly cleared away as he met her sweet sunny countenance, out of which all the north wind effect of their discussion had entirely vanished. But she did not put out her hand to him, and again he felt the omission and set it down to pride.
Well, I can't figure out what is up with Margaret and why she wouldn't shake his hand this time. This time she knew. This time she knew it was going to be offered, and this time I would have thought she would have done it, especially when he just apologized right before leaving. She is a puzzle. She is a puzzle wrapped in an enigma, wearing an Indian shawl. So there it is. Until next week, I leave you. I will be back with another chapter, and I will be one week closer to moving. So I hope I'll be able to shower between now and then, because God only knows we may never be able to get to the bathroom again. I hope you have a great week. I will talk to you soon. Bye.
341, Chapter 16, Book Talk begins at... Welcome to CraftLit, the podcast for crafters who love books. My name is Heather Ordover, and I'm podcasting from where the Delaware River meets the Old York Road, New Hope, Pennsylvania. Episode 341, Sunrise, Sunset. Well, hello. Yes, it is true. My children are growing up. I drove this morning to Dulles Airport, my least favorite airport in the continental United States, and took my son to fly by himself to go spend a week with his grandparents. Those of you who've been around for a while may recall that my older son, when he was 9, I think, got to go on a trip with his grandparents to the Galapagos. His grandfather is a nature photographer, and so he got to go down to the Galapagos and go nose to nose with all sorts of amazing creatures. And he did, in fact, meet Lonesome George, who passed away just a couple of years ago, I think, the last of the Galapagos tortoises. So he had this big adventure, and so his grandparents were trying to figure out what to do with Thing 2, and they decided that getting to go to all of the parks that they could cram in down in Southern California would be great. And the boy is going to swim with a beluga whale. Now, first off, my kid is a fish. He loves to be in the water. But second off, oh my gosh, I am never going to stop hearing about how cool it is to swim with beluga whales. But there he was going off on his own on an airplane, flying by himself. And he was so excited. It was literally, as they took him down the jetway, because you can't get on the jetway, you're allowed to walk your child up to the door, but not past it. And he turned around and said, "Love you, Mom, bye," and took off with the flight attendant, and that was it. So it was a big day, but it was also a big 4 hours start to finish, actually closer to 5, because you have to go extra early, go through a whole bunch of paperwork extra early, and then you go through, I don't even know how many hoops to get all the right documentation and make sure that the information is correct for the other side, and one thing after another, which I'm not complaining is what you want. But the upshot is that from the door to the gate, it was probably 3 full hours. When we walked up, first class was lining up and they'd almost called first class to go in. And then they have the parent hang around. They say to stay right there at the gate until the plane starts to taxi away. And then you can go back to the front of the airport, especially at Dulles, which it's 400 million miles from where you embark to where your car is. And don't get me started. So I went all the way back to the entry, and that took 45 minutes. And then before you leave the building, you're supposed to check and make sure that the plane actually did get in the air and is underway. Because if something happens, like they're on the lineup to take off and everything is looking great, and then all of a sudden the air conditioning goes out, they have to taxi back to the jetway. And one would not want one's child to be sitting there freaking out as they put everybody on another plane or anything like that. So that was my morning. If you have never done this before, I just wanted to let you know it actually works pretty seamlessly. And certainly the people at the airport are perfectly aware of what the routine is, even if you aren't. And for those of you who have done it, was my experience pretty normal? Was it outrageously long or crazy or complicated. It seemed okay, except for the fact that it was Dulles Airport. But we went to Dulles because that way he could get a nonstop, which obviously way better for a little 10-year-old boy flying by himself. So today's chapter is chapter 16, and it is titled The Shadow of Death. And you may remember that Margaret had asked for a recommendation for a doctor. And this chapter, we will see the doctor. And one of the things that really struck me in this week's chapter is how much internal monologue there is throughout the chapter. It begins with it and it ends with it. And I was trying to figure out, is that why it's striking me as such a new thing, different from the other chapters? And I don't know. I didn't go back and reread everything because time, but I did get the feeling that the impact of beginning and ending with two different characters kind of mulling over their own reactions to Margaret, that this point in the book is a pretty good time to have that happen. It gives us a little bit more insight into how everybody else is seeing Margaret, and it gives a chance to Gaskell to telegraph us some very specific information about her. But also, of course, by doing that, information about these other people who are talking as well. And it's been interesting as I've been reading more and more about the book. One of the things that keeps coming up is people talking about Margaret as being a proto-feminist, that she is clearly a strong-willed young woman and written by a strong-willed woman as well. But for all of that almost pig-headedness that we see coming out of Margaret from time to time, she is almost always working within the constructs of what is expected of a young lady in Victorian England. And that, I think, is a really fascinating thing, because if we look at this in a more modern context, or make a more modern allusion, if you look at the cast on Mad Men back in the very first seasons of the show, I think in some ways we'd be tempted to say that Peggy, the young woman who rises through the ranks to become a writer within the company, it's kind of easy to look at her and go, oh, well, then she would be the Margaret Hale. She would be the proto-feminist. She would be the one who's out there taking the risks and out there pushing against the glass ceiling and finding her way up. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought, no, actually, while I think that there's a valid argument to be made there, I actually think I would go with Joan, the character that's played so perfectly by Christina Hendricks, who is the fabulous, soft and round redhead. I can't help but think that the person that Margaret most closely would align with is this character of Joan, who was perfect representative of her time. And her time really was the 50s. And we come into the story as everything is transitioning into the 60s. And everything about Joan is about to fall by the wayside. Similarly to how everything from Victorian and Edwardian women, expectations, fashion, all of that gets blown out of the water by the advent of the 20s and the flappers. There's this huge sea change that's very generational. And it's very easy to look back at the women with the beehive hairdos and the pencil skirts, or the women with the corsets when you're a flapper, and kind of scorn them and disallow them from having their triumphs. Because those triumphs were going to be different, and in some cases, and in some ways, smaller, but triumphs nonetheless. I mean, the fact that Joan was able to actually make a career for herself as a woman in the 50s was pretty impressive. And of course, she's only continued to be fabulous as the television show for Mad Men has gone on. And Peggy continues to be fabulous Peggy, and we all love her. And she is, of course, blazing trails of her own in a very different kind of career path where she's actually allowed to be creative, but she's had to fight tooth and nail for that too. It's just a very different kind of fight from what Joan had to do. Joan had to be more subtle about it. She had to work within this very narrow feminine construct of what was expected behavior-wise. But the only way she was ever going to be successful was to play that system and play it well, to win at that game. It's not her fault. The rules were changed on her in the middle of her climb. And so Margaret becomes this very interesting character because she is pushing at the boundaries. She is stretching the limits. She is finding ways to be more, stronger, better, all of those things, which doesn't mean she doesn't have meltdowns. It doesn't mean that she doesn't fall apart from time to time. And I think more importantly, it certainly doesn't mean that she doesn't make mistakes. Now, one of the things that I remember noticing when I read other kind of not comedies of manners, because those are usually satires and their point is part of the humor, but those kind of sweet books about mannered girls who have tea parties, and it's all the books that Jane Austen makes fun of when silly girls are reading silly books. It's those kinds of books that I'm thinking of. That in those books, when there's a girl like Margaret, she gets punished. You know, anybody who goes outside of a very narrowly defined world of gentility and starts to work at all outside of the family home, that's crossing a line. And Margaret's not going off to work in the factory or anything, but she is having more and more of a life out in Milton. And all of it's because of Bessie, but it's also because she was the one who had to set up the house and get all the stuff there and, you know, figure out how to pack up a house that they'd been in for the last 30 or 40 years. And in these other books, these other more kind of quote unquote traditional books, Margaret would probably be punished for that. In fact, even in a Dickens book, it's very possible that a character like her would be punished for that. I'm thinking notably of Madame Defarge. She is a tough cookie. She's a businesswoman. She runs the wine shop and her husband while she knits, which is great, and leads to marvelous knitting pattern books. She is outside of the world of what a woman is quote unquote supposed to be, and she gets punished for it. So as you can tell, I've been thinking a lot about Margaret this week and about how she is fitting into her Victorian world, trying very hard not to judge from our standards, but to really take a look at where she would have been in that world. And I keep wondering, you know, how did mothers of daughters view this book? Was this the kind of book that you'd slip to your daughter when she turns 14 so you can kind of get her thinking about how you don't have to be milquetoast, you don't have to spend your days like a wet noodle, you can go and do stuff and be of value, and of course for Margaret and for Elizabeth Gaskell, being of service was appropriate and desirable. So there's that as well. But there's a lot of information we're going to learn in today's chapter, so I am going to let you get to it, and then we will move on from there. All right, have fun listening to chapter 16 of North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell.
Chapter 16. The Shadow of Death. Trust in that veiled hand, which leads none by the path that he would go, and always be for change prepared, for the world's law is ebb and flow. From the Arabic. The next afternoon, Dr. Donaldson came to pay his first visit to Mrs. Hale. The mystery that Margaret hoped their late habits of intimacy had broken through was resumed. She was excluded from the room while Dixon was admitted. Margaret was not a ready lover, but where she loved passionately and with no small degree of jealousy. She went into her mother's bedroom just behind the drawing room and paced it up and down while awaiting the doctor's coming out. Every now and then she stopped to listen. She fancied she heard a moan. She clenched her hands tight and held her breath. She was sure she heard a moan. Then, all was still for a few minutes more, and then there was the moving of chairs, the raised voices, all the little disturbances of leave-taking. When she heard the door open, she went quickly out of the bedroom. "My father is from home, Dr. Donaldson. He has to attend a pupil at this hour. May I trouble you to come into his room downstairs?" She saw and triumphed over all the obstacles which Dixon threw in her way, assuming her rightful position as daughter of the house in something of the spirit of the elder brother, which quelled the old servant's officiousness very effectually. Margaret's conscious assumption of this unusual dignity of demeanor towards Dixon gave her an instant's amusement in the midst of her anxiety. She knew, from the surprised expression on Dixon's face, how ridiculously grand she herself must be looking, and the idea carried her downstairs into the room. It gave her that length of oblivion from the keen sharpness of the recollection of the actual business in hand. Now that came back and seemed to take away her breath. It was a moment or two before she could utter a word, but she spoke with an air of command as she asked, "What is the matter with Mamma? You will oblige me by telling the simple truth." Then, seeing a slight hesitation on the doctor's part, she added, "I am the only child she has, here, I mean. My father is not sufficiently alarmed, I fear, and, therefore, if there is any serious apprehension, it must be broken to him gently. I can do this. I can nurse my mother. Pray, speak, sir. To see your face and not be able to read it gives me worse dread than I trust any words of yours will justify."
"My dear young lady, your mother seems to have a most attentive and efficient servant who is more like a friend."
"I am her daughter, sir."
"But when I tell you she expressly desired that you might not be told."
"I am not good or patient enough to submit to the prohibition. Besides, I am sure you are too wise, too experienced to have promised to keep the secret."
"Well," said he, half smiling, though sadly enough, "there you are right. I did not promise. In fact, I fear the secret will be known soon enough without my revealing it."
He paused. Margaret went very white and compressed her lips a little more. Otherwise, not a feature moved. With the quick insight into character, without which no medical man can rise to the eminence of Dr. Donaldson, he saw that she would exact the full truth, that she would know if one iota was withheld, and that the withholding would be torture more acute than the knowledge of it. He spoke 2 short sentences in a low voice, watching her all the time, for the pupils of her eyes dilated into a black horror, and the whiteness of her complexion became livid. He ceased speaking. He waited for that look to go off, for her gasping breath to come. Then she said, "I thank you most truly, sir, for your confidence. That dread has haunted me for many weeks. It is a true, real agony. My poor, poor mother!" Her lips began to quiver, and he let her have the relief of tears, sure of her power of self-control to check them. A few tears, those were all she shed, before she recollected the many questions she longed to ask. "Will there be much suffering?" He shook his head. "That we cannot tell. It depends on constitution, on 1,000 things. But the late discoveries of medical science have given us large power of alleviation." "My father," said Margaret, trembling all over. "I do not know, Mr. Ale. I mean, it is difficult to give advice, but I should say, bear on with the knowledge you have forced me to give you so abruptly till the fact which I could not withhold has become, in some degree, familiar to you, so that you may, without too great an effort, be able to give what comfort you can to your father. Before then,
My visits, which of course I shall repeat from time to time, although I fear I can do nothing but alleviate. 1,000 little circumstances will have occurred to awaken his alarm, to deepen it, so that he will be all the better prepared. Nay, my dear young lady, nay, my dear, I saw Mr. Thornton, and I honour your father for the sacrifice he has made, however mistaken I may believe him to be. Well, this once, if it will please you, my dear. Only remember, when I come again, I come as a friend, and you must learn to look upon me as such, because seeing each other, getting to know each other at such times as these, is worth years of morning calls."
Margaret could not speak for crying, but she wrung his hand at parting.
"That's what I call a fine gal,"
thought Dr. Donaldson, when he was seated in his carriage and had time to examine his ringed hand, which had suffered slightly from her pressure.
"Who would have thought that little hand could have given such a squeeze? But the bones were well put together, and that gives immense power. What a queen she is, with her head thrown back at first to force me into speaking the truth, and then bent so eagerly forward to listen. Poor thing. I must see she does not overstrain herself, though it's astonishing how much these thoroughbred creatures can do and suffer. That gal's game to the backbone. Another who had gone that deadly colour could never have come round without either fainting or hysterics. But she wouldn't do either, not she, and the force of her will brought her round. Such a girl as that would win my heart if I were 30 years younger. It's too late now. Ah, here we are at the Arches."
So out he jumped with thought, wisdom, experience, sympathy, and ready to attend to the calls made upon them by this family, just as if there were none other in the world. Meanwhile, Margaret had returned into her father's study for a moment to recover strength before going upstairs into her mother's presence.
"Oh, my God, but this is terrible. How shall I bear it? Such a deadly disease. No hope. Oh, Mamma. I wish I had never gone to Aunt Shaw's and been all those precious years away from you. Poor Mamma. How much she must have borne. Oh, I pray thee, my God, that her sufferings may not be too acute, too dreadful. How shall I bear to see them? How shall I bear Papa's agony? He must not be told yet, not all at once, it would kill him. But I won't lose another moment of my own dear precious mother." She ran upstairs. Dixon was not in the room. Mrs. Hale lay back in an easy chair with a soft white shawl wrapped around her and a becoming cap put on in expectation of the doctor's visit. Her face had a little faint colour in it, and the very exhaustion after the examination gave it a peaceful look. Margaret was surprised to see her look so calm. "Why, Margaret, how strange you look! What 'tis the matter?" And then, as the idea stole into her mind of what was indeed the real state of the case, she added, as if a little displeased, "You have not been seeing Dr. Donaldson and asking him any questions, have you, child?" Margaret did not reply, only looked wistfully towards her. Mrs. Hale became more displeased. "He would not surely break his word to me and—" "Oh, yes, Mamma, he did. I made him. It was I. Blame me." She knelt down by her mother's side and caught her hand. She would not let it go, though Mrs. Hale tried to pull it away. She kept kissing it, and the hot tears she shed bathed it. "Margaret, it was very wrong of you. You knew I did not wish you to know." But, as if tired with the contest, she left her hand in Margaret's clasp, and by she returned the pressure faintly. That encouraged Margaret to speak. "Oh, Mamma, let me be your nurse. I will learn anything Dixon can teach me. But you know I am your child,
and I do think I have a right to do everything for you."
"You don't know what you are asking," said Mrs. Hale with a shudder.
"Yes, I do. I know a great deal more than you are aware of. Let me be your nurse. Let me try, at any rate. No one shall ever try so hard as I will do. It will be such a comfort, Mamma."
"My poor child. Well, you shall try. Do you know, Margaret,
Dixon and I thought you would quite shrink from me if you knew."
"Dixon thought," said Margaret, her lip curling.
"Dixon could not give me credit for enough true love for as much as herself. She thought, I suppose, that I was one of those poor sickly women who like to lie on rose leaves and be fanned all day. Don't let Dixon's fancies come any more between you and me, Mamma. Don't, please," implored she.
"Don't be angry with Dixon," said Mrs. Hale anxiously. Margaret recovered herself.
"No, I won't. I will try and be humble and learn her ways, if you will only let me do all I can for you. Let me be in the first place, Mother. I am greedy of that. I used to fancy you would forget me while I was away at Aunt Shaw's, and cry myself to sleep at nights with that notion in my head.
And I used to think, how will poor Margaret bear our makeshift poverty after the thorough comfort and luxury in Harley Street, till I have, many a time, been more ashamed of your seeing our contrivances at Helston than of any stranger finding them out."
"Oh, Mamma, and I did so enjoy them. They were so much more amusing than all the jog-trot Harley Street ways. The wardrobe shelf with handles that served as a supper tray on grand occasions, and the old tea-chests stuffed and covered for ottomans. I think what you call the makeshift contrivances at dear Helston were a charming part of the life there."
"I shall never see Helston again, Margaret," said Mrs. Hale, the tears welling up into her eyes. Margaret could not reply. Mrs. Hale went on. "While I was there, I was forever wanting to leave it. Every place seemed pleasanter. And now I shall die far away from it. I am rightly punished."
"You must not talk so," said Margaret impatiently. "He said you might live for years. Oh, Mother, we will have you back at Helston yet."
"No, never. That I must take as a just penance. But Margaret, Frederick—" At the mention of that one word, she suddenly cried out loud as in some sharp agony. It seemed as if the thought of him upset all her composure, destroyed the calm, overcame the exhaustion. Wild, passionate cry succeeded to cry. "Frederick, Frederick, come to me! I am dying, little firstborn child. Come to me once again." She was in violent hysterics. Margaret went and called Dixon in terror. Dixon came in a huff and accused Margaret of having overexcited her mother. Margaret bore all meekly, only trusting that her father might not return. In spite of her alarm, which was even greater than the occasion warranted, she obeyed all Dixon's directions promptly and well, without a word of self-justification. By so doing, she mollified her accuser. They put her mother to bed, and Margaret sat by her till she fell asleep, and afterwards till Dixon beckoned her out of the room, and, with a sour face, as if doing something against the grain, she bade her drink a cup of coffee which she had prepared for her in the drawing-room, and stood over her in a commanding attitude as she did so.
"You shouldn't have been so curious, miss, and then you wouldn't have needed to fret before your time. It would have come soon enough. And now, I suppose, you tell master, and a pretty household I shall have of you." "No, Dixon," said Margaret sorrowfully. "I will not tell Papa. He could not bear it as I can." and by way of proving how well she bore it, she burst into tears.
I knew how it would be. Now you're waking your mamma, just after she's gone to sleep so quietly. Miss Margaret, my dear, I've had to keep it down this many a week, and though I don't pretend I can love her as you do, yet I loved her better than any other man, woman, or child. No one but Master Frederick ever came near her in my mind. Ever since Lady Beresford's maid first took me in to see her dressed out in white crape and corn ears and scarlet poppies, and I ran a needle down into my finger and broke it in, and she tore up her worked pocket handkerchief after they'd cut it out, and came in to wet the bandages again with lotion when she returned from the ball, where she'd been the prettiest young lady of all. I've never loved anyone like her. I little thought then that I should live to see her brought so low. I don't mean no reproach to nobody. Many a one calls you pretty and handsome and what not. Even in this smoky place, enough to blind one's eyes. The owls can see that. But you'll never be like your mother for beauty. Never. Not if you live to be 100.
Mamma is very pretty still. Poor mamma.
Now, don't you set off again, or I shall give way at last, whimpering. You never stand master's coming home and questioning at this rate. Go out and take a walk and come in something like. Many's the time I've longed to walk it off, the thought of what was the matter with her and how it all must end.
Oh, Dixon, said Margaret, how often I've been cross with you, not knowing what a terrible secret you had to bear.
Bless you, child. I like to see you showing a bit of spirit. It's the good old Beresford blood. Why, the last Sir John but 2 shot his steward down, there where he stood for just telling him that he'd racked the tenants, and he'd racked the tenants till he could get no more money off them than he could get skin off a flint.
Well, Dixon, I won't shoot you, and I'll try not to be cross again.
You never have. If I've said it at times, it has always been to myself just in private by way of making a little agreeable conversation, for there's no one here fit to talk to. And when you fire up, you're the very image of Master Frederick. I could find it in my heart to put you in a passion any day, just to see his stormy look coming like a great cloud over your face. But now you go out, miss. I'll watch over missus. And as for master, his books are company enough for him if he should come in.
I will go, said Margaret. She hung about Dixon for a minute or so, as if afraid and irresolute. Then, suddenly kissing her, she went quickly out of the room.
Bless her, said Dixon. She's as sweet as a nut. There are 3 people I love. It's Mrs., Master Frederick, and her. Just them 3, that's all. The rest be hanged, for I don't know what they're in the world for. Master was born, I suppose, for to marry Mrs. If I thought he loved her properly, I might get to love him in time. But he should have made a deal more on her, and not always been reading, thinking. See what it has brought him to. Many a one who never reads nor thinks either gets to be rector and dean and what not. And I dare say master might if he'd just minded missus and let the weary reading and thinking alone. There she goes,
looking out of the window as she heard the front door shut.
Poor young lady. Her clothes look shabby to what they did when she came to Elston a year ago. Then she hadn't so much as a darn stocking or a clean pair of gloves in all her wardrobe. And now...
So, Dixon, who never says out loud to Margaret how much she loves her, and only says, there's only 2 people I love in the world, your mom and Frederick. And she says it to Margaret's face. It's like, wow, well, thank you. But it's obvious that Margaret already knows that, so that's not a surprise. What would be a surprise is if she could hear what Dixon said in her own mind. And going back to the doctor at the beginning of the chapter, he didn't start with the interior monologue about Margaret, but they had that scene at the beginning, and a very important one, because Margaret asks for the news. She's ready for the news. She wants to hear the news, hears the news, bursts into tears. But that doesn't mean she's weak. It just means she's human. And the doctor is the one to put that into perspective for us. You know, and I loved the line, if any other woman who had turned the color she turned when I told her the news would have fainted, but not her. She rallied, she pulled it together. And then that marvelous comment about her squeezing his hand so hard that his hand that had rings on it was going to be sore for a while, because of course when you pinch against somebody's ring, that is an owie. I loved that description, and it made me think of the Age of Innocence, because there was that comment that the doctor makes about her bones, Margaret's hand, or her bones being well put together. And I was thinking about Mrs. Manson Mingott in Age of Innocence. When May comes over, she looks at the engagement ring, and she makes a crack about about how May's tennis playing spreads the joint, but that the bone structure, the underneath it all, was good. And I thought, this is so interesting. I wonder if is this connected with phrenology? Is it that kind of bone obsession that we're dealing with here? Or is it the corset thing that you need to have a relatively decent bone structure to be able to stand up over time in a corset? I'm not sure exactly what the obsession is. So if you know anything about this, I tried to research this under every possible turning I could come up with, and I couldn't find anything. But I did find out a little bit about Dixon's line that the person that she was talking about was so horrible that they'd get skin off a flint. And this idea of a skinflint, someone who is overly miserly. Being a miser is bad enough, but being a skinflint is being overly miserly. This goes back at least to the 1700s. Some people attribute it to a Scottish saying. I don't know if that's true. It kind of looked apocryphal, but I've been trying to figure out what getting the skin off a flint is, because a lot of people seem to misunderstand this. They're talking about peeling the skin off a flint. And if you're talking about like a flint and steel, I don't get that. The one thing I could understand would be if you skin a flint, it's like skinning a carrot, that you're taking shavings off of it. And if you saved all of the shavings off a flint, all of the little tiny pieces that you knock away, and then tried to light a fire with those, that would be A, foolish, B, it would make kind of sense about skinning a flint, and it would be kind of a great and obtuse commentary on the nature of a miser. If you're going to wear your flint down to nothing but shavings, to the skins off the top of it, it's going to be useless, and you'll feel proud of yourself for saving all the money. Ooh, you didn't have to go buy another flint, but you're not going to get any benefit from it. However, that's the closest I could get to a decent interpretation of the phrase. If you know the history of that, please put it in the comments, in the show notes, to share with the world. I am fascinated by that, because I grew up hearing the word skinflint. The phrase skin off a flint, or peeling the skin off a flint, I had never heard before. And I loved that moment when Margaret was trying to calm her mother down and talk about Helston, and her mom said, "Oh, I was horrible. I didn't appreciate when I was there." Ben finally fessed up to the fact that she was embarrassed by it and was worried that Margaret was going to come home and go, "Oh, this miserable little place. It's so provincial and it's so boring and small after Harley Street." And then Margaret says those lovely little lines about all the clever contrivances at Halston, the shelf that had handles on it that you could also use as a tray, a serving tray, and all of these little things. And I was thinking, this is how people survived with big families in little homes, is they had to come up with really clever ways to multitask. And Gaskell just opened up and gave us a couple that I thought were so intriguing. And it was lovely. It was this lovely little small home moment. And we don't get many of those in literature. So bless Elizabeth Gaskell for doing that, because I appreciated that part. And then, of course, there's poor dear Frederick and Mrs. Hale being very, very, very sad, as you would imagine, that she will probably die without ever seeing her son again. We don't know what she's dying of. We do know that the doctor was able to communicate it in a couple of sentences. She doesn't appear to have movie wasting disease, otherwise known as tuberculosis and consumption, but she's clearly got something. And I don't know. Is it cancer? Probably. Maybe. I can't think of anything else that would be so immediately recognized as, oh my gosh, my mom is going to die. And that the doctor would say, not that we have a cure, but that there have been marvelous strides in medicine to manage the pain, palliative care. And so that's where I started to go, oh, well, maybe that's cancer. I haven't been able to find any definitive responses from any of the literary critics about what it actually is, but that's my best bet. Let me know if you have other thoughts based on the way the doctor described things, because I'm interested. And there is where I am going to have to leave it this week. I hope you have a great week. I will talk to you soon. You take care of yourself and have a great one. Bye. 342, Chapter 17. Book Talk begins at... Welcome to CraftLit, the podcast for crafters who love books. My name is Heather Ordover, and I'm podcasting from the shores of the Potomac in Virginia, the Old Dominion. Episode 342, The Van Approacheth. All right, so this week we have Chapter 17. I also wanted to share with you just quickly, I know I said I wasn't going to do this because I didn't think I'd have anything in time, but I forgot to mention it on 341, so here we go, on 342. I met an author and an artist, just kind of accidentally at a store, and we started talking, and it was very interesting. The author is a mom who had a mom blog, and that grew into a book called Epic Mom. Her name is Julie Harrison, and she was just great and interesting and funny. But I had been listening to her, to Julie, speaking to another woman. They both worked at this shop, and I'd been while I was kind of puttering around looking. This was one of those kind of antique-y shops that has lots of interesting stuff. Some of it modern, some of it crafty, Etsy kind of stuff. Some of it antiques that people have brought in on consignment. And so, it's easy to spend a lot of time just looking in a store like that. And as I'm puttering around, I'm listening to them, and they're both very interesting people. And Laura's history was fascinating. But what made her even more interesting is that she is a Byzantine icon painter. And it turns out that this is a whole thing. I went looking for pictures that she had painted on the web because she has a lovely brochure, and then I started looking for images, and that led me to site after site of people who paint Byzantine iconography. So it's that kind of flat, pre-understanding perspective and facial perspective, those kind of flat paintings that I don't know what it is about them. They feel reverent to me. They just do. I don't know if it's the gold leaf. I don't know if it's the style. I don't know if it's just that when I saw that style for the first time, this is what it meant. I don't know. But her stuff is beautiful. So there we are. I thought this was going to be an episode completely devoid of all things crafty, and yet it had more craftiness than 341. Go figure. Life is weird. So Chapter 17 of North and South. Last chapter, you may recall, ended with Dixon, actually ended very interestingly with Dixon stopping mid-sentence. The punctuation is actually an M dash, that long double dash.
an exclamation point because she kind of cuts off mid-thought. Probably she had to go do something. So today's chapter will pick up with Margaret leaving the house, and she's going to go for a walk. And anytime she's out in Milton, you can be fairly confident, just like in Bleak House, anytime you have a chapter that has Joe in it, you are fairly confident that there will be at least a few slang terms that do not get used today, at least not in the United States. I don't know, they might still get used somewhere in the UK, but if they do, please put a note in the comments. I would be very curious to know which of these words is still in use. I have a sneaking suspicion about one of them, but first, I thought I would wait and go over the words right before we listen to the book so that they're fresh in your head. And whereas last week's chapter was full of, or at least bookended by, two pretty important internal monologues, the post-Dr. Donaldson conversation and the Dixon monologue, this week is all dialogue. There's a little bit of description at the beginning, but there's some really great dialogue going on between the characters in this chapter. And we're finally able to put some of the pieces together about how Margaret is starting to see things. I was about to say more clearly, and I suppose it's true, more clearly, but I think we are therefore also starting to see things more clearly. And that's probably even more important because we've heard the master's side of strike talk. We've heard his mother's side of the strike talk as well. But we heard Mr. Thornton a couple of chapters ago talking about this. And so we know how he feels about it. And we've heard Margaret talking about the South and how idyllic and perfect and Eden-like the whole place is. And we haven't really gotten any contrasting, opposing viewpoints added into the mix yet. And today we start to. And particularly remembering that Elizabeth Gaskell was not a native of this area, which gave her that wonderful outsider perspective. I am vastly impressed by this chapter and a few more that are coming up, because it seems to me that getting to know a mill town in northern England at this time would have been quite difficult. And then trying to represent that mill town's thoughts and ways of seeing things to an outside world, basically to a London audience, first and foremost, because you want sales in London to be good. And Dickens certainly would have wanted that you would have to be very cautious about the way that you present the hands. There's the master and there's the hands, which is, as you might imagine, kind of insulting to the hands. You think? They're not slaves, but they're only hands. They're not actually men. I'd always heard the term field hand when I was growing up, and somehow that doesn't seem quite as offensive as just calling a man a hand. These are my hands, all 520 of them who work in my mill. It's creepy, and you can really see how it would wear thin. And so we're going to start seeing the light through the chink in the stone wall of that particular thorny issue. And we'll have more to talk about the implications on the flip side, but the language that I wanted to give you before we get into the chapter. Dang, D-A-N-G, we're used to dang being kind of like darn it in the United States. And in this context, to dang someone would be to defeat them, and it would usually be kind of violently. So that was a serious thing. I think we mentioned this one before. The word clem, C-L-E-M, is starving. So clemmed to death would be starved to death. You'll hear a lot of clemming talking about in this chapter. Factory age. A child was factory age if they were 9 years old or older. A child 9 years old or younger was too young to work in the factory by law. So things have changed a little bit since then. Abated wage, which would be a reduced wage. Knobsticks, K-N-O-B-S-T-I-C-K-S. Knobsticks is the term that they used back then for strikebreakers or scabs. I don't know if that term is still in use or if the ever so lovely scabs has replaced it. That you're going to hear knobsticks quite a bit, not just in this chapter, but for the rest of the book. So that'll pop up again. If you say something be farred, it would be like something be blowed, or that's nonsense. Don't pay any attention to that. A fillip is an Fillip, and that's like something that perks you up. A little fillip. I don't know if that's like fill up or something else. I couldn't find a reference for it. If you find one, please let us know. There's a reference to buying a 4-pounder. I had no idea what that was. It's buying a 4-pound loaf of bread, which would be A, special because you're buying it somewhere else, and B, special because it's big. It's a big loaf of bread. And then we have a couple of references to the book of Revelation. Oh, that probably tells you exactly where we're going to go in this chapter, doesn't it? I went back and forth. I actually think I kind of think it's important to know these going in when you listen to the chapter the first time. It's important, I think, because in today's chapter, you can start to understand why Bessie is so taken with the book of Revelation. In today's chapter, she is going to reference chapter 8, verse 11. She's not going to call it out by its call letters, but she is going to read it. And just to give you an important heads up on this, the part that she talks about is, and the name of the star is called Wormwood, and the third part of the waters became wormwood, and men died of the waters because they were made bitter. So this is during the first 4 trumpets, when I think it's the first 4 angels appear and blow their trumpets, and they're starting everything. They're getting it all going. And there is, as you might expect with the book of Revelations, a whole interesting host of interpretations that people have come up with over the last 2,000 years for what this means. And the important thing here is what Bessie says before, which is, in an upshot, sometimes when I'm really sad, it helps for me to think that this was planned, that I drank the wormwood water, and that's why I'm dying. Because if it's prophesied, then that's very different from a meaningless, accidental, sad, tragic death of a good person. Now it's a holy war. It's an opportunity. You've made it through, and your reward isn't just coming, it's imminent. That's a very different way of thinking about what she knows is coming. And in fact, she goes on and later references very specifically the 7th chapter. And the 7th chapter is when you get the description of the great multitude that's clad in white robes who stand before the throne of God. One of the translations is, "These are they which came out of the great tribulation and have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb." I think that's chapter 7, verse 14. And so you can see it's like, I've been through all of this. I have been through hell. And I've come out the other side, pure and clean and ready to spend the rest of eternity with God. You can't fault her for that. And of course, the interesting thing is watching Margaret respond to this, because we already know what Margaret thinks of the book of Revelation. Not her favorite book. The other term that we've talked about before on the podcast, but never quite in this context, is fustian. Fustian cloth, Fustian. It was really low-grade cotton woven cloth. Probably had vegetable matter in it, very nubby, not very fine at all, and wouldn't be a whole lot of fun to work with, much less cut. And you'll hear about somebody who's off fustian cutting. They're doing piecework. So that will come up in this chapter as well. And now I'm going to let you listen. There's more important stuff to talk about at the end, but now I feel like you're prepared for getting all the subtext of what's going on in today's chapter, chapter 17.
Chapter 17. What is a strike? There are briars besetting every path, which call for patient care. There is a cross in every lot, and an earnest need for prayer. Anonymous. Margaret went out heavily and unwillingly enough. But the length of a street, yes, the air of a Milton Street, cheered her young blood before she reached her first turning. Her step grew lighter, her lip redder. She began to take notice instead of having her thoughts turn so exclusively inward. She saw unusual loiterers in the streets, men with their hands in their pockets sauntering along, loud-laughing and loud-spoken girls clustered together, apparently excited to high spirits and a boisterous independence of temper and behavior. The more ill-looking of the men, the discreditable minority, hung about on the steps of the beer-houses and gin shops, smoking and commenting pretty freely on every passer-by. Margaret disliked the prospect of the long walk through these streets before she came to the fields which she had planned to reach. Instead, she would go and see Bessie Higgins. It would not be so refreshing as a quiet country walk, but still, it would perhaps be doing the kinder thing. Nicholas Higgins was sitting by the fire smoking as she went in. Bessie was rocking herself on the other side. Nicholas took the pipe out of his mouth and, standing up, pushed his chair towards Margaret. He leant against the chimney-piece in a lounging attitude, while she asked Bessie how she was.
Her's rather down in the mouth in regards to spirits, but her's better in health. Her doesn't like this strike. Her's a deal too much set on pace and quietness at any price.
"This is the third strike I've seen," said she, sighing, as if that was answer and explanation enough.
Well, third time pays for all. See if we don't dang the masters this time. See if they don't come and beg us to come back at our own price. That's all. We've missed it aforetime, I grant you, but this time we laid our plans desperate deep.
"Why do you strike?" asked Margaret. "Striking is leaving off work till you get your own rate of wages, is it not? You must not wonder at my ignorance. Where I come from, I never heard of a strike." "I wish I were there," said Bessie wearily. "But it's not for me to get sick and tired of strikes. This is the last I'll see. Before it's ended, I shall be in the great city, the holy Jerusalem."
So full of the life to come, I cannot think of the present. Now I, you see, am bound to do the best I can here. I think a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. So, them's the different views we take on the strike question.
"But," said Margaret, "if the people struck, as you call it, where I come from, as they are mostly all field labourers, the seed would not be sown, the hay got in, the corn reaped."
"Well,"
said he. He had resumed his pipe and put his "well" in the form of an interrogation. "Why," she went on, "what would become of the farmers?" He puffed away.
"I reckon they'd have either to give up their farms or to give fair rate of wage."
"Suppose they could not or would not do the last. They could not give up their farms all in a minute, however much they might wish to do so, but they would have no hay nor corn to sell that year, and where would the money come from to pay the labourers' wages the next?" Still puffing away. At last he said,
"I know naught of your ways down south. I've heard they're a pack of spiritless, downtrodden men, welly clemmed to death, too much dazed with clemming to know when they're put upon. Now, it's not so here. We know when we're put upon, and when too much blood in us to stand it. We just take our hands for our looms and say, 'You may clem us, but you'll not put upon us, me masters.' And be danged to 'em, they shan't this time."
"I wish I lived down south," said Bessie. "There's a deal to bear there," said Margaret. "There are sorrows to bear everywhere. There is very hard bodily labour to be gone through, with very little food to give strength. But it's out of doors, said Bessie, and away from the endless noise and sickening heat. It's sometimes in heavy rain and sometimes in bitter cold. A young person can stand it, but an old man gets racked with rheumatism and bent and withered before his time, yet he must just work on the same, or else go to the workhouse. I thought you were so taken with the ways of the South Country. So I am, said Margaret, smiling a little as she found herself thus caught. I only mean, Bessie, there's good and bad in everything in this world, and as you felt the bad up here, I thought it was but fair you should know the bad down there.
And you say they never strike down there?
Asked Nicholas abruptly. No, said Margaret. I think they have too much sense.
And I think,
replied he, dashing the ashes out of his pipe with so much vehemence that it broke,
it's not that they've too much sense, but that they've too little spirit.
Oh, father, said Bessie, what have ye gained by striking? Think of that first strike, when mother died. How we all had to clem, you the worst of all, and yet many a one went in every week at the same wage, till all were gone in that there was work for, and some went beggars all their lives out after.
Aye, said he, that there strike was badly managed. Folk got into the management of it, as were either fools or not true men. You see, it'll be different this time.
But all this time you've not told me what you're striking for, said Margaret again.
Well, you see, there's 5 or 6 masters who have set themselves again paying the wages they've been paying these 2 years past, and flourishing upon, and getting richer upon. And now they come to us and say we're to take less, and we won't. We'll just clem them to death first, and see who'll work for 'em then. They'll have killed the goose that laid 'em the golden eggs, I reckon.
And so you plan dying in order to be revenged upon them?
No, said he, I do not. I just look forward to the chance of dying at my post sooner than yield. That's what folk call fine and honourable in a soldier, and why not in a poor weaver chap?
But, said Margaret, a soldier dies in the cause of the nation, in the cause of others.
He laughed grimly. My lass, said he, you're but a young wench, and don't you think I can keep 3 people, that's Bessie and Mary and me, on 16 shilling a week? Don't you think it's for myself I'm striking work at this time? It's just as much in the cause of others as yon soldier, only mayhappen the cause he dies for is just that of somebody he never clapped eyes on, nor heard on all his born days, while I take up John Busher's cause, as lives next door but one, with a sickly wife and 8 children, none of 'em on factory age. And I don't take up his cause only, though he's a poor good-for-naught, as can only manage 2 looms at a time, but I take up the cause of justice. Why are we to have less wage now, I ask, than 2 years ago?
Don't ask me, said Margaret. I am very ignorant. Ask some of your masters. Surely they will give you a reason for it. It is not merely an arbitrary decision of theirs come to without reason.
You're just a foreigner and nothing more, said he contemptuously. Much you know about it. Ask the masters. They'd tell us to mind our own business, and then they'd mind theirs. Our business being, you understand, to take the bated wage and be thankful, and their business to bait us down to clemming point to swell their profits. That's what it is.
But, said Margaret, determined not to give way, although she saw she was irritating him, the state of trade may be such as not to enable them to give you the same remuneration.
State of trade? That's just a piece old master's humbug. It's rate of wages I was talking of. The masters keep the state of trade in their own hands and just walk it forward like a black bugaboo to frighten naughty children with into being good. I'll tell you it's their part, their cue, as some folks call it, to beat us down, to swell their fortunes, and it's ours to stand up and fight hard, not for ourselves alone, but for them round about us, for justice and fair play. We help to make their profits, and we ought to help spend 'em. It's not that we want their brass so much this time as we've done many a time afore. We're getting money laid by, and we resolve to stand and fall together. Not a man on us will go in for less wage than the union says as I'll do. So, I say, hooray for the strike, and let Thornton and Slickson and Hamper and their set look to it.
Thornton, said Margaret. Mr. Thornton of Marlborough Street?
Aye, Thornton of Marlborough Mill, as we call him.
He is one of the masters you are striving with, is he not? What sort of master is he?
Did you ever see a bulldog? Set a bulldog on hind legs and dress him up in coat and breeches, and you're just getting John Thornton.
Nay, said Margaret, laughing, I deny that. Mr. Thornton is plain enough, but he's not like a bulldog with its short, broad nose and snarling upper lip.
No, not in look, I grant you, but let John Thornton get hold on a notion, and he'll stick to it like a bulldog. You might pull him away with the pitchfork ere he'd leave go. He's worth fighting with, is John Thornton. As for Slickson, I take it some of these days he'll wheedle his men back with fair promises that they'll just get cheated out of as soon as they're in his power again. He'll work his fines well out on him, I'll warrant. He's as slippery as an eel, he is. He's like a cat, as sleek and cunning and fierce. It'll never be an honest up-and-down fight with him as it will be with Thornton. Thornton's as dour as a doornail, an obstinate chap every inch on him, the old bulldog.
Poor Bessie, said Margaret, turning round to her. You sigh over it all. You don't like struggling and fighting as your father does, do you? No, said she heavily. I'm sick on it. I could have wished to have had other talk about me in my latter days than just the clashing and clanging and clattering that has wearied on my life long about work and wages and masters and hands and knobsticks.
Poor wench, latter days be farred. Thou'rt looking a sight better already for a little stir and change. Beside, I shall be a deal here to make it more lively for thee.
Tobacco smoke chokes me, said she querulously.
Then I'll never smoke no more in the house, he replied tenderly. But why didst thou not tell me afore, thou foolish wench?
She did not speak for a while, and then so low that only Margaret heard her. I reckon he'll want all the comfort he can get out of either pipe or drink afore he's done. Her father went out of doors, evidently to finish his pipe. Bessie said passionately, No, am I not a fool, am I not, miss? There, I knew I ought for to keep father at home and away from the folk that are always ready for to tempt a man in time of strike to go drink. And then my tongue must needs quarrel with this pipe poison. And he'll go off, I know he will, as often as he wants to smoke, and nobody knows where it'll end. I wish I'd letting myself be choked first. But does your father drink? Asked Margaret. No, not to say drink, replied she, still in the same wild, excited tone. But what wouldn't you have? There are days with you as with other folk, I suppose, when you get up and go through the hours just longing for a bit of change, a bit of a fillip, as it were. I know I gone and bought a 4-pounder out of another baker's shop to come in on such days, just because I sickened at the thought of going on forever with the same sight in my eyes, and the same sound in my ears, and the same taste in my mouth, and the same thought, or no thought for that matter, in my head, day after day forever. I've longed for to be a man to go spreeing, even if it were only a tramp to some new place in search of work. And father, all men have it stronger in 'em than me to get tired of sameness and work forever. And what is 'em to do? It's little blame to them if they do go into the gin shop for to make their blood flow quicker and more lively, and see things they never see at no other time, pictures and looking-glass and such like. But father never was a drunkard, though maybe he's got worse for drink now and then. Only, you see," and now her voice took a mournful, pleading tone, "at times so strike there's much to knock a man down, for all they start so hopefully, and where's the comfort to come from? He'll get angry and mad, they all do, and then they get tired out with being angry and mad, and maybe had done things in their passion they'd be glad to forget. Bless your sweet, pitiful face, but you do not know what a strike is yet."
"Come, Bessie," said Margaret. "I won't say you're exaggerating, because I don't know enough about it, but perhaps as you're not well, you're only looking on one side, and there is another and a brighter to be looked to."
"It's all well enough for you to say so, who have lived in pleasant green places all your life long, and never known want or care, or wickedness either, for that matter."
"Take care," said Margaret, her cheek flushing and her eye lightening. "How you judge, Bessie." "I shall go home to my mother, who is so ill, Bessie, that there's no outlet but death for her out of the prison of her great suffering, and yet I must speak cheerfully to my father, who has no notion of her real state, and to whom the knowledge must come gradually. The only one who could sympathize with me and help me, whose presence could comfort my mother more than any other earthly thing, is falsely accused, would run the risk of death if he came to see his dying mother. This I tell you, only you, Bessie. You must not mention it. No other person in Milton, hardly any other person in England knows. Have I not care? Do I not know anxiety, though I go about well-dressed and have food enough? Oh, Bessie, God is just, and our lots are well portioned out by him, although none but he knows the bitterness of our souls." "I ask your pardon," replied Bessie humbly. "Sometimes, when I've thought of my life and the little pleasures I've had in it, I've believed that maybe I was one of those doomed to die by the falling of a star from heaven. And the name of the star is called Wormwood, and the third part of the waters became wormwood, and men died of the waters because they were made bitter. One can bear pain and sorrow better if one thinks it has been prophesied long before for one. Somehow, then it seems as if my pain was needed for the fulfillment. Otherwise, it seems all sent for nothing." "Nay, Bessie, think," said Margaret. "God does not willingly afflict. Don't dwell so much on the prophecies, but read the clearer parts of the Bible. I dare say it would be wiser, but where would I hear such grand words of promise, hear tell o' anything far different from this drear world, and this town above all, as in Revelations? Many's the time I've repeated the verses in the 7th chapter to myself, just for the sound. It's as good as an organ, and as different from every day too. No, I cannot give up Revelations. It gives me more comfort than any other book in the Bible." "Let me come and read you some of my favourite chapters." "Aye," said she greedily. "Come, father will maybe hear you. He is deaved with my talking. He says it's all naught to do with the things o' today, and that's his business." "Where's your sister?" "Gone fustian cutting. I were loath to let her go, but somehow we must live, and the union can't afford us much." "Now I must go. You have done me good, Bessie." "I done you good?" "Yes, I came here very sad, and rather too apt to think my own cause for grief was the only one in the world. And now I hear how you have had to bear for years, and that makes me stronger."
Bless you, I thought the good doing was on the side of the gentlefolk. I shall get proud if I think I can do good to you. You won't do it if you think about it, but you'll only puzzle yourself if you do. That's one comfort. You're not like no one I ever seed. I don't know what to make of you, nor I of myself. Goodbye. Bessie stilled her rocking to gaze after her. I wonder if there are many folk like her down south. She's like a breath of country air somehow. She freshens me up above a bit. Who'd have thought that face, as bright and as strong as the angel I could dream of, could have known the sorrow she speaks on? I wonder how she'll sin. All on us must sin. I think a deal on her for sure, but father does the like, I see, and Mary even. It's not often her stirred up to notice much.
So, as large an impact as Milton has had on Margaret, Margaret is starting to have on Milton. And wasn't the scene with Bessie and her father, and when he discovers that she doesn't like pipes, gets up and leaves so she doesn't have to smell his pipe anymore. His getting up and giving Margaret his chair without asking, without looking askance, without having an issue. He's a good guy. He's a good guy. And Bessie, sweet Bessie. It makes sense right now, right? The revelation thing, now that you've heard the whole chapter laid out in front of you. And finally, we have started to hear some negative things out of Margaret's mouth about the South. And the conversation parallels between Margaret and Higgins and Margaret and Thornton when it comes to discussing business and work and masters in hands and labor. It's marvelous the way Gaskell has crafted this opportunity for us to be spectators. It's almost like, watching a tennis match. It's on this side and on that side, and you just keep going back and forth, but it works. And we're learning a lot. And then also, not only hearing about the South, something negative about the South, but hearing about the Union and hearing Higgins' version of what the Union is doing and why, and then hearing Bessie's version, having watched a couple of strikes now, the impact of what the Union does on regular people like her, not factory hands. It is complicated stuff. And in fact, I don't know if this will still be roiling when the podcast comes out, but there's been all sorts of hubbub in the United States because the Congress voted down some law that I guess in some ways looks like the Equal Rights Amendment that didn't pass in the 70s. I didn't really understand what was going on, and I wasn't entirely clear on why it got voted down. But then I saw somebody in a comments section of a post, it was on Facebook or on somebody's blog, that someone said, look, I don't know what the hubbub is about all of this. The law was passed in 1963, equal pay for equal work. Everybody can shut up now. And I went, what? Because I remember reading the Equal Rights Amendment when I was a kid thinking, well, sure, you should get paid the same. If you're qualified the same and doing the same work, you should all be getting the same base salary. Kind of duh. But I went to hunting and found that, in 1963, there was a law that was passed that was supposed to have taken care of this problem, which is fascinating because 63, civil rights and everything. And here's this bill that's supposed to protect women. And for some reason, either it didn't work or wasn't enforceable, or people are just deciding to make a brouhaha now. I don't know. I do know that there have been times in my life when I was offered a ridiculously small amount of money. And I know that men who were offered the same job, who were less qualified than me, were offered more money. I had not taken the job at that point, but I know it happens. But I am hoping that one of our lawyer listeners, of whom I know there are many, and you guys are awesome, I hope one of you understands and can explain what just happened. What happened in 63? What happened in, what was it, 76, 77, when the Equal Rights Amendment was supposed to go up for a vote and got voted down? And then what just happened now? Because I'm seeing very interesting conversations, non-conversations happening. Again, because we think we know who the other person is, and we're talking to our picture, our straw man of that person instead of actually what they're saying. And there's a lot of shrill kind of snarking going on. But there seems to be two conversations, and I can't tell which one actually applies. And as I've seen them, the two conversations go like this. One, of course, women make less money than men. A certain percentage of the women in the United States are home with kids, or they're work-at-home moms or stay-at-home moms, and they're not in the workforce. So, of course, statistically, women make less than men in this country. That is not something you can legislate, because then you'd be legislating that everybody has to go out and get a salaried position, and that's ridiculous. Okay, so that's fine. But I didn't think that that was what the bill was about. I thought the bill was about like the Lilly Ledbetter thing, where you have somebody who is equally qualified, different genders, but same qualifications, same work experience, same education, same job performance, all of that stuff, all things being equal. A woman's base salary is consistently often lower than the men's. And I know when I was offered this extraordinarily, shockingly low wage, and I balked and said, really? You're serious? The response to me was, well, what does your husband do? And I'm not joking. That was 1995. So not ancient history. Actually, for some of you, that probably is ancient history. It doesn't feel like ancient history to me. Some of you were knee-high to a grasshopper back then. So I can't figure out what all the hubbub is about. And I'm hoping somebody can explain it, because it seems to me that it's kind of beautifully dovetailing up with what's going on in North and South, that you have the masters who, as Thornton says, if he were a working man, he would not want his boss telling him what to do with his time or his money. And that, additionally, he doesn't have to explain the business side of things to the men. They should trust him to do his job, which is run the place, and he trusts them to do their job, which is the labor. And there's a division of labor, and for a good reason. And clearly there's some snobbery going on here. It's not a huge surprise. And then from the laborers' side of things, they don't care that it's a good year or a bad year. They want to make a living wage to feed their family on. And what they're seeing from the outside is the masters stay rich no matter what is happening with the price of cotton, or the price of bringing the cotton in, or the price that they can get for the cotton once it's spun and woven and everything. They don't care. They just want to make enough money to feed their family. And it does seem that people keep talking at cross purposes because they think they know who they're talking to, and they've made pretty grand assumptions about motives, and maybe not so much. So we're definitely going to hear more about all of this and the strike and what that means and what it will do to this community as we head further into the book. And how it affects Margaret is really wonderful. So on that note, I'm going to go move. You have a great week. I will be back and talking to you like normal next week. Take care. Have a great one. Bye.
You can find show notes for this episode and links to other episodes at CraftLit.com. CraftLit also appears anywhere you can get a podcast: iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and on, including its own dedicated app. There are lots of ways to support CraftLit, from patreon.com/CraftLit to CraftLit.com memberships and channel memberships on YouTube. You can find out more details at CraftLit.com/premium. And as always, thank you for your support. And remember, if your hands are too busy to pick up a book, at least you can turn one on.